All right, let's talk more about the modeling with Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist and associate professor at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're seeing projections from Alberta. You just heard the Premier. Are the projections for Alberta realistic?
Well, it's difficult to say if they're realistic. I don't know the assumptions that went into them or the data that went into it. However, they seem reasonable to me. And they're a bit distinct from what we've seen in Quebec and Ontario in a variety of ways. I can talk about it if you wish. But most importantly is in the prediction of the peak. It's a bit later that has been predicted in Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah, he did mention that Alberta started later than the other provinces as far as seeing cases. So that would make sense. What do you think of the fact that he decided to go with projections that go till the end of the summer?
Well, that's also reasonable. Keep in mind that when we're modeling, we become less precise the further in time that we go. And the other provinces, at least the two that have reported so far, have chosen to stop their projections in April or May because they feel there isn't enough information to project further. The Americans and the Icelandics and other people have chosen to make models for a longer timeline as well. I see no problem with this so long as you accept that it is imprecise in the future. People need to know what is likely to come, even if that likeliness is a small probability.
So the problem or the challenge for people would be assessing the numbers, right? Even in the probable scenario, you have such a gap from 400 deaths that are probable all the way up to 3,100 deaths that are probable. Tell me what goes into that and why we see such a big gap.
That's a difficult question. It comes down to the concatenating errors that go into the calculations. So the assumptions that we make are also huge. So we could look at these assumptions or those assumptions. The rate of change of transmission could be this or it could be that. So they're probably modeling a variety of scenarios and giving us the extreme endpoints of those various scenarios. This is the responsible thing to do. We have to always stress that this is so imprecise and it's like it's throwing things at the board and trying to group them in a strategic fashion. So these models are meant for planning purposes. They're not meant for predictive purposes. The important thing to take away, though, is had we not done the public health investments like the social distancing and the isolation, it would have been very stark indeed. So the model shows us what we avoided and possibly what we'll avoid in the future if we relax our strategies at the moment.
So clearly, as you mentioned, this is meant to plan so that the province can rev up for the worst case scenario in case they get there. But is there a benefit, do you think, to the average person seeing these numbers? Because we know some of the provinces are deciding whether or not to release them or to get them done and keep them private. Quebec, for example, has said exactly that. They're only going to show until the end of April because it gets less precise after that.
Sure. I think there is some benefit in sharing with the public, and because I believe in transparency. The public is a partner in this process, and they're not going to buy in to having to restrict their movements and their liberties much longer unless they understand the thought process that goes into these decisions. And for them to see the data or the modeling or the science that our decision makers are being guided by, they are less likely to buy into this plan. So I think it's a good strategy. I also like the fact that he's put forth a plan for returning to normalcy, and no other province has done that yet.
We are also looking at Quebec, which released their numbers today as well, as you know, and the question the average person wants to know is, well, when can we stop living like this, right? When will these measures, will these measures ease up? And clearly they will ease up later in Alberta than Quebec.
That is correct, based upon the modeling. A lot of the American modeling shows that the epidemic, this wave of the epidemic, is anticipated to wane significantly, is that the right word, abate significantly by the end or beginning or end of June. That doesn't mean we can return to normalcy at that point, though. It just means that maybe some semblance of normalcy can be garnered then. Strong public health measures must be in place. And that was mentioned in today's presentation, the ramping up of testing, contact tracing. That stuff has to be in place across the country once this current wave is over, or we're going to see a second wave pretty soon, a couple of months after this first wave is over.
So we know what the measures are across the country. They differ from in every province, but they're not too far off. Do you think we're going to see not just extended measures, but even more severe measures put in place in some provinces?
It's entirely possible. And the reason for that is right now we're in a mitigation strategy where by social distancing, we are slowing the rate of production of new cases. We can go into a suppression strategy whereby with actual quarantine, we get that reproduction number really quite low so that the number of new cases gets small indeed. It may get to that point if people aren't taking the social isolation seriously, or if the current strategy is not allowing us to stay below that ICU bed saturation line. I don't think we'll get to that point because I think people are taking it seriously now, but we might.
Let me just ask you as well, is it likely we will see a second wave, or do we just not know that yet?
We don't know that yet. However, I think it's wise to plan for one. And there might be a third wave too. This pandemic is likely going to last a couple of years unless a vaccine shows up first. So depending on how we roll out our public health infrastructure, that will determine if that second and third wave occur and how big they will be if they do show up.
All right, Raywat Deonandan, I do have to leave the conversation there. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.